You walk into a Dollar General on a Wednesday afternoon. There's an old woman at the counter, a cardigan buttoned to the neck, a handbasket instead of a cart, and 11 items on the belt, none of them over $4. You glance at her basket, and it looks like nothing. Epsom salt, twine, a bag of dried yarrow, the kind of things your grandmother bought and you never asked why. But that woman is not just shopping. She is maintaining something. And what's in that basket could keep your family warm, calm, and fed long after the shelves around you go empty. What she knows traces back to a kitchen ledger kept in 1942 in a hollow outside Marshall, North Carolina. A ledger almost nobody outside the county has ever opened. By the end of this video, you will have gone through it too. The old hollow families of Appalachia have been living this way for close to 200 years. They never started preparing because for them it was never preparation. It was just how a house was run. And the list they still quietly buy every week at the Dollar General is the same 11 items most people push past on the way to the register, never realizing those 11 items are the backbone of a household that doesn't lean on the power company, the pharmacy, or the supermarket to survive a bad week. Before this video ends, you will know all 11 items by name. You will know exactly where to find them in your own store. And you will know something your great-grandmother knew that skipped a generation or two on its way to you. Everything you need is already sitting on a shelf 5 minutes from your front door. The only thing missing is knowing which $5 to spend and why. By the time this video is over, you will. The kitchen with no lights. The first time I sat in a farmhouse outside Marshall, I watched a woman named Opal's granddaughter, Ruth, cook a full dinner for 8 people during a 3-day ice storm that had knocked the power out across 2 counties. She didn't stop stirring. She didn't check her phone because there was nothing to check. 8 people ate hot food that night. Grandkids, a husband, an uncle who'd driven in early because he knew where this house would be warm. Nobody went to bed cold. Nobody went to bed hungry. And nobody in that house has ever once needed the grid to get through a bad week. You don't need a new house, a bunker, or a generator for any of this. You already own the house you need. You just need to know what to pick up on the way home tonight. Item 1, Epsom salt. Not table salt, Epsom salt, the plain white bag in the pharmacy aisle, usually under $3. Most people buy it for a sore back and forget it exists after that. The hollow families buy it by the bag for something else entirely. It draws infection out of a wound, soothes swelling before a doctor is reachable, and, mixed into a foot soak, has kept plenty of an elderly relative off their feet just long enough to heal instead of worsening. Foxfire archive interviews recorded at Berea College in the 1970s describe Epsom salt soaks as standard first aid in homes 2 hours from the nearest clinic. 1 bag, kept in the cabinet, does the job a same-day doctor's visit would otherwise have to do. Item 2, white vinegar. A gallon jug, usually around $3. The average household spends several $100s a year on cleaning products. A hollow household spends a fraction of that. A jug of vinegar and a bar of lye soap does most of it. But cleaning is the small use. The bigger use is preserving. A jar of green beans packed in a vinegar brine and sealed properly will sit on a shelf, unrefrigerated, for well over a year. That's a vegetable that would spoil in your crisper drawer in 2 weeks, lasting through an entire winter instead. During a power outage, the same jug disinfects a water jug, cuts mineral crust off a hand pump, and keeps eggs shelf-stable for months without a fridge. 1 $3 jug replacing a shelf of specialty cleaners that never expires. Item 3, dried pinto beans. Sold in 1-pound bags for around $1.50. The hollow families buy them by the 20-pound sack, because a pound of dried beans holds more usable protein than a pound of fresh chicken, costs a quarter as much, and, kept dry, stores for decades. Storage studies on dried legumes sealed in mylar have found protein content holding steady after 20-plus years in storage. The chicken in your freezer is inedible within 3 days without power. The beans on the bottom shelf will outlast the freezer itself. Item 4, heavy cotton bed sheets for the doorway, not the bed. Under $5, and the hollow families don't put them on a mattress. They hang them across doorways because the single biggest energy drain in most American homes isn't the water heater. It's heating rooms nobody's standing in. Federal energy guidance has recommended closing often used rooms for decades, and on an average winter heating bill the savings are real, for the cost of a closed door and a hung sheet. During an outage, that same sheet traps the heat from one wood stove or kerosene heater in a single room, turning it into the one warm room in the house. I've stood in one of those rooms on a 15-degree night. It held above 60 with nothing but a stove, a closed door, and a cotton sheet doing the work a furnace couldn't do without power. The part nobody profits from. Here's something worth sitting with before we go further. You were never taught this, and it's not because of some boardroom conspiracy. It's simpler than that. Every dollar spent on an insulation contractor is a dollar somebody earns. Every dollar spent on a smart thermostat is a dollar somebody earns. A cotton sheet hung in a hallway earns nobody anything. There's no ad campaign for it. A rural extension bulletin from the early 1950s recommended exactly this, sealing off rooms with heavy fabric to concentrate heat, and by the late 1970s that bulletin had quietly stopped being reprinted, replaced by glossy brochures about central heating systems. The knowledge didn't vanish. It just stopped being handed out. The Hollow families kept it because nobody ever handed them anything else. Item 5. Army surplus wool blankets. Around $5 secondhand, sometimes less. Layered 2 beneath and 2 above from October to April, they turn an ordinary bed into the warmest room in a powerless house. The body gives off a steady amount of heat overnight. Trap it under wool instead of losing it to a cold mattress and cold air, and you'll sleep warmer at 3 a.m. with no furnace running than most people do with the thermostat set to 68. Try it tonight. Pull one blanket out of the closet, drop the thermostat 5 degrees, and see how your bill moves by the end of the month. Item 6. Strike Anywhere matches. A box of 254 under $3. Not a lighter. Lighters need butane. Butane needs a supply chain. A supply chain needs working gas stations. A match needs dry wood and a rough strip. The Hollow families keep a tin in every room, sealed against damp, because the first thing you lose in a blackout is light, the second is your phone, and the third is discovering your gas stove's igniter is electric and won't light without one. Item 7. Beeswax candles. A set of plain, unscented candles, usually under $4. One candle throws enough light to read by and burns for the better part of a night. Placed one in the kitchen, one in the bathroom, one in the main room. 3 candles light a small house adequately for pennies a night. A lot cheaper than replacing a freezer full of spoiled food, which is exactly why the Hollow families never panic when the lights go out. For the house you already own. If you're thinking this only applies to people building a homestead from scratch, this next part is for you specifically. It works in any house in America. Needs no permit and no contractor. Costs under $15. And it's the single best thing you can do this weekend. Item 8. Clear plastic drop cloth. A roll from the paint aisle around $4. This is interior storm window sealing, documented in a regional energy conservation study from the late 1970s that found it cuts heat loss through old single-pane windows dramatically. Cut the plastic 2 inches larger than the window frame. Tape it flat against the inside of the frame with ordinary tape. Leave about an inch of air gap to the glass. That trapped air layer performs close to a modern double-pane window. The Hollow families don't need this. Their old farmhouses were built with interior shutters from the start. But in a 1970s ranch house with single-pane aluminum windows, this $4 roll is the cheapest insulation upgrade you'll ever make. I sealed every window in my own house in an afternoon, and my heating bill dropped noticeably that winter. Several $100s over the season from one roll of plastic. The same trick works in reverse in summer, blocking radiant heat on the sunny side of a house during a hot weather outage, which for an elderly person in July can be the difference between uncomfortable and dangerous. Item 9. Dried yarrow. Sold in the tea or supplement aisle for around $5. The Hollow families have used it for fevers and colds for generations. Brewed as a hot tea when the roads are too icy to reach a pharmacy, and the clinic is 2 hours away. I watched Ruth Caudle brew it for her grandson during that same ice storm. By morning his fever had broken. She's never once taken a grandchild to an ER for a cold in decades of raising them. Nobody markets yarrow because nobody can patent a weed that grows along a fence line. There's no study funded to prove what a household already knows works, because there's no balance sheet it helps. The knowledge survived because the people who kept it never depended on the system that ignores it. Item 10. Butcher's twine. Plain cotton twine from the baking aisle under $2 a spool. It looks like nothing and does almost everything. Lamp wicks, hanging herbs to dry, tying kindling bundles, mending torn clothes, splinting a finger, replacing a broken shoelace. One spool does the work of a dozen specialty products and never goes bad. During an outage, a length of twine as a wick in a small jar of cooking oil makes a working lamp that burns for hours on a few tablespoons of fuel. An old trick that crossed the Atlantic with the first settlers and never left Appalachian kitchens. It throws enough light to find a child in a hallway or check on an elderly parent, for almost nothing, and almost nobody today knows it exists. Item 11. Baking soda. The plain box under $1. It cleans teeth when the toothpaste runs out, calms an upset stomach, deodorizes a fridge that's lost power and started to smell, soaks up moisture in stored grain, smothers a small grease fire, softens hard water for laundry, and mixed with vinegar clears a slow drain better than most commercial products. Nobody in these households knows the chemistry behind why one box does all that. They just know it works, and it always has. The 12th thing, the one from the ledger. That brings us to the last piece, the one I've been holding back, because it's the one that turns 11 items into an actual system. In 1942, a farm wife named Opal Caudle kept a kitchen ledger in a hollow outside Marshall, North Carolina. Her granddaughter held onto it for decades until it was cataloged by the Foxfire Archive at Berea College in the mid-1990s, where it sat mostly unread. On one page, Opal described what she called the hearth corner, and as far as I can tell, it has never appeared in a modern preparedness guide. You take the smallest interior room in the house, not the bedroom, not the kitchen, the smallest room with no outside walls. In most houses today, that's a hall closet, a small bathroom, or a pantry. Move a mattress in. Hang heavy cotton sheets across every doorway leading to it. Set one candle and a jar of water inside. That becomes your warm room during an extended outage. Opal didn't know the physics, but it holds up. A small interior room shares walls only with other heated space, never with the cold outside. Two adults sleeping in it raise the temperature by 10 to 15 degrees within a few hours. The candle adds a few more. The jar of water buffers the swings overnight. Within a night, that little room holds close to 65 degrees while the rest of the house drops into the 30s and the outside sits below freezing. Opal's ledger describes families surviving a brutal winter in the mid-1930s, when temperatures fell well below zero and there was no rural power to speak of, by sleeping entire families in pantries and hall closets. Nobody froze. Nobody got sick. It was passed down by word of mouth for 3 generations and nearly forgotten. People today spend thousands on generators trying to recreate what Opal did with a closet, a mattress, a candle, and a jar of water. This weekend, walk through your house and find the smallest interior room with no exterior wall. That's your hearth corner. Buy the 11 items under $50 total, generous quantities of each. Stack the cotton sheets near that room. Set the candles and matches inside it. Fold a wool blanket on the shelf. That's it. You've just built a system that would make Opal Caudle nod, and that cost less than a tank of gas. The knowledge existed. It got quietly set aside, kept alive by people who never depended on the systems that set it aside. Now it's been handed to you across 80 years and a few generations of forgetting. What you do with it is up to you, but you can't say nobody told you. These 11 items aren't a shopping list. They're a way of walking into a Dollar General and seeing possibilities instead of products, competence instead of price tags. The same quiet know-how that's kept hollow families warm and fed through every bad winter for 200 years without ever needing the grid to show up. If you're the kind of person who believes ordinary knowledge gets quietly pushed aside, you already know what to do. Go pick up the 11 items this week, find your hearth corner, hang one sheet in one doorway, and feel the room change with your own hand. Tell me in the comments which of the 11 surprised you most, the twine oil lamp, the storm window trick, the yarrow tea, or Opal's hearth corner. I read every one, and the next video gets built from what you tell me. If this gave you something you didn't have an hour ago, subscribe to Eli Mercer. Not to support me. Subscribe because there's a group of people quietly recovering knowledge that slipped away from us, one household at a time. Next time. A hollow food preservation method that helped families get through the 1918 flu with almost nothing, and something the old families called the Sunday drawer. 7 items in one kitchen drawer that solve a problem in under a minute with no power and no phone. Subscribe so you don't miss it. One last thing before bed tonight. Open the cabinet where you keep the Epsom salt. Look at that plain white bag. It's older than your house, older than the pharmacy that sells it, and it's been quietly doing its job for longer than anyone alive can remember. The Hollow families never forgot what it was for. Now neither will you. Because once you see one ordinary object the way they see it, you start seeing all of them differently. The vinegar under your sink stops being a cleaning supply and becomes a preservative old enough to have kept root cellars fed through 100 winters before refrigeration existed. The baking soda in your fridge stops being an odor absorber and becomes the same simple compound that's kept things stable for longer than most nations have existed. The cast iron skillet on your stove stops being cookware and becomes a heat battery. The same principle behind wrapping a warm stone in flannel and tucking it at the foot of a child's bed on a January night. That's the shift I want you to leave with, more than any single item. The Hollow families aren't ready for a blackout because they're afraid of one. They're ready because they never stopped living in a world where a blackout was just called Tuesday. I sat with an older man named Warren Caudle outside Marshall, who's lived through 3 major regional outages over the decades, and none of them changed much of anything in his house. The lamps got lit at dusk. The food stayed cool in the spring house. The bread still came out of the wood stove. The only real difference, he said, was that the road out front got quieter. That's the standard we're trying to get back to. Not prepping the way that word's been sold to people for $400 a bucket. Just ordinary competence. The kind almost every household had 100 years ago and almost none has now. And the gap between those two states is smaller than you'd think. 11 items under $50, one Saturday afternoon at the store, and one evening spent putting things where you can find them in the dark. Don't buy all 11 at once. Pick 3, bring them home, put them where you'll actually reach for them, then go back for 3 more. That's how the Hollow families built this. Not in a weekend, but a habit at a time. A grandmother teaching a granddaughter how to render lard in October. A father teaching a son to bank a fire so it's still warm by morning. It moves slowly, household to household, hand to hand, and it doesn't depend on the internet, the grid, or a supply chain that can vanish in an afternoon. You're part of that chain now, whether you meant to be or not. You know what the Epsom salt is for. You know what twine and cooking oil can do at 3 in the morning. You know what yarrow tea does for a fever when the roads are too bad to drive. You know what Opal Caudle figured out about a hearth corner. That's in your head now. The only question is whether you pass it on. Tell one person this week. Show someone the twine lamp. Bring one more person into the chain. That's how it's worked for as long as anyone's kept a household running. So go look at that white bag in your cabinet tonight, and then look at everything else in there with new eyes, because your whole kitchen is full of tools you didn't know you had, waiting for someone who finally knows what they're for.